by the charging for rarer types and the idea that the originals double the price of the copies.
Yes.
Some notion of value, photography, market at that stage, which I think is quite a fascinating thing we'd like to touch on later. Our next speaker is Keller, who's Curator of Photographs at the San Francisco Museum of Modern Art. Corey's exhibition and book brought to light photography and the invisible. It's another big influence on both Ben and I in our thinking about revelations. A truly inspirational exhibition, and one which included those from the National Museum of Photography collection. Corey is a specialist in 19th century photography. Her love of the medium extends to full historical breadth of photography, and she's organised exhibitions ranging from the documentation of the Great San Francisco earthquake in 1906 to a career survey of photographer Francesca Woodman, which travelled to Museum in New York in 2009. She's currently working on a large-scale presentation of the museum's permanent collection entitled About Time, Photography and Long-Term Change, which will be an open exhibition by one of the expanded facility of this next spring. Welcome to Corey.
Especially to the Science Museum and to Lizzie, who took such good care of us. It's really a tremendous honor to be here. When I did the research for my exhibition, I spent quite a bit of time in London, including 2 blissful days in Bradford, where I'd be very happy to just lock me up and leave me to die in there. It's a pretty great place. So it's really a treat to be back. I haven't been back since I was here for that research. I ask you to bear with me. I'm going to do probably a little more reading than I usually do, mostly because this is a topic that I'm so excited about. I'm likely to go off on terrible tangents, and this is the only way I have to keep myself in check. I'm easily distracted. In any case, you're going to have seen more of my show. I'm sorry about that, feels a little self-serving. More of my show than you ever planned to, but I'm just going to talk a little bit about this exhibition, which was organized in 2008. It brought together some 200 photographs exploring phenomena that were invisible to the naked eye but made visible through photography, ranging from photomicrographs, astronomical photography, photographs of electricity and magnetism, X-rays. The photographic objects ranged in character from daguerreotypes to stereoscopes, to accordion folded albums, to presentation posters. It was really a sort of wide variety to really show the diversity of 19th century science. The art critic for the San Francisco Chronicle opened his exhibition review with a single sentence, quote, "Should we consider brought to light an art exhibition just because the San Francisco Museum of Modern Art has organized it?" Before we get around to addressing that provocation, however, I'd like to sort of pick off a little bit where Kelly left off. This is also, I have to say, one of the exciting things about it. Kelly and I have been pen pals for years and years, so this is our first time meeting in person, so that to me was worth the trip to London alone. And you can see the same views of my show, just in case you wanted to go to San Francisco virtually, but here you can see a little bit about the diversity of the material. There's a daguerreotype demonstrating the transit of Venus on a photographic revolver, and an album, and a display print. So you get a pretty good sense of how diverse the material is, one of the wonderful things about the 19th century. So I'd like to travel briefly back to the early decades of the 20th century in the years following World War I. There was a new appreciation for the machine following the first technological war, despite the great national and personal damage wrought by machines during that war. Across Europe, there persisted a sort of optimism that technology could be the social and political solution for the future. As a machine for making images, the camera, and by extension photography, came to be seen as a quintessential modern art form. Not only were the pictures made with the hard-edged precision of the machine, but they were infinitely reproducible in the newspaper, as advertisements, as posters, and in the camera's more mobile cousin in cinema. Therefore, photography, unlike painting, was a democratic medium, a medium for the masses. its capacity to transform the world completely into new and unsettling visual experiences through extreme close-ups, bird's eye views, worm's eye views, and serial exposures, was the medium of the modern moment. The leading proponent of this view in Germany, as you all know, is Laszlo Moholy-Nagy. So convinced was he of photography's importance to contemporary society that not to understand it, he so famously said, would amount to a kind of blind ignorance. Illiteracy of the future, he wrote, will be ignorance of photography. Moholy believed that although photography was already nearly 100 years old at this point, its potential had not yet been realized, and the moment was now. In 1925, he published Painting, Photography, Film. His treatise on what has come to be known as the New Vision. He illustrated the manifesto with a vast range of photographic images, juxtaposing X-rays with astronomical photography and artistic sort of radical perspectives by himself and his colleagues. The book discards any notion of photography as a kind of realistic documentation of the world, instead showing how photography, quote, either completes or supplements our optical instrument, the eye. And unfortunately, because we're under construction right now, our library, I wasn't able to access our copy of the book, but if you go upstairs, there's, I think, at least 3 spreads on view, so you can actually see it. The burgeoning interest in photography in the 1920s gave rise to a huge number of sprawling shows in Germany, but it was the 1929 exhibition Film und Foto, or FIFO as it came to be known, in Stuttgart that came to be synonymous with the New Vision. Interestingly, the selection committee did not include any photographers. It was art historians and graphic designers, but it was only after Moholy-Nagy put up a tremendous fuss that he was invited to organize the introductory gallery, which you can see in a really bad scan there. I was a very late convert to PowerPoint. I'm always insisting on the beautiful slides. And then once I got into PowerPoint, I realized you can grab images from all over the place. And then my whole idea of quality went right out the window because you start to see how many cool pictures there are on the internet. It's a problem. Just as in his photography film and painting photography film, Moholy included in this introductory gallery a wide range of photographs. You can see, maybe you can see, the very tall pictures. That's a full body X-ray, it's very wonderful. And he showed these kinds of photographs without hierarchy or commentary. The work celebrated the strengths of photography, the ability to show the world anew, the precision of machine vision, technological innovation, and the transformation of the world into a radically new kind of picture. But while the inclusion of scientific photography in FIFO has been well studied, its incorporation into a landmark exhibition of the same period on the other side of the Atlantic has been perhaps less thoroughly discussed. And I'm sorry, I don't have a slide. I wasn't able to find an installation view. But in 1937, Beaumont Newhall, curator of photography at the Museum of Modern Art in New York, organized a major exhibition celebrating the centennial of photography. 2 years premature, but it's almost a centennial. I don't know what you call it, 98th anniversary, but it was close. The catalog he published to accompany the show, History Photography from 1839 to the present, has come to be the standard textbook in history photography, now in its 5th or 6th edition. But the history that he presents in that catalog is decidedly more teleological and clean than what he actually showed on the walls of the museum. There were some 800 objects on 4 floors of the museum that included press photos, aerial photographs, war photographs, and scientific photographs. And it may come as no surprise that Moholy-Nagy, by then living in the United States, served as one of his advisors. Though the exhibition was generally well received, the inclusion of such diverse material was not as easily accepted at the Museum of Modern Art as it had been in Stuttgart. Louis Mumford, who's a critic, a New Yorker, wrote, quote, "Perhaps it is a little ungrateful for me to suggest that the Museum of Modern Art has begun to overreach itself in the matter of documentation. What is lacking in the present exhibition is a weighing and an assessment of photography in terms of pure aesthetic merit, such an evaluation as should distinguish a show in an art museum from one that might be held, say, in the Museum of Science and Industry." The function of an art museum, Mumford argues, is to be the judgment seat of aesthetics. How could Newhall allow such pedestrian material into the high temple of modern art? Yet these pictures fit precisely into Newhall's conception of the machine aesthetic. In the United States, the new vision emerged as a pictorial style, stripped of the political agenda and social urgency that had characterized it in Europe. And all of the works in Newhall's show are characterized by their machine precision. This is from Marta. Newhall's precision, Newhall's distillation of a photographic aesthetic would receive its fullest development at the Museum of Modern Art under the direction of now legendary curator John Sharkovsky, who took over the direction of the department from Edward Steichen in 1962. In a series of exhibitions, most notably the 1966 The Photographer's Eye, Sharkovsky identified a formal vocabulary unique to photography, often described as a photographic counterpart to the modernist art critic Clement Greenberg. His idea of medium specificity. In The Photographer's Eye, Sharkovsky outlined the characteristics that not only made photographs, but also defined all photography, regardless of their origin or intent. He broke the medium down into such categories as the frame, time, and the thing itself. And the show included work by well-known artists, as well as snapshots, news photos, and commercial studio portraits, treated without any distinction between them, and each equally worthy of attention and analysis. So it was under this rubric, in 1967, he organized an exhibition called Once Invisible. Some 120 scientific photographs from the 1880s through the mid-1960s, united under the description of, quote, wondrous and beautiful images that exist in the world but cannot be seen by the human eye without the aid of photography. Sharkovsky partnered with a scientific consultant to help him source the material. And the slide that I'm showing is perhaps misleading because of the checklist for the show, these were the only two pictures I was able to actually find images of. The range of work he included was really out of industrial archives and from Eastman Kodak, and they're not pictures that were at the time iconic or having gone on to become so. I was really, me and Google spent a lot of time trying to find these pictures, and these were the only two I was able to turn up. He wrote in the wall text for the exhibition, quote, this exhibition is not a survey of scientific photography. Its subject matter is the form, the morphology, not the function of the pictures shown. These pictures were made in the pursuit of knowledge. They are included here, however, not because of their scientific importance, but because of their role in expanding our visual imagination. Far be it from me to tangle, posthumously no less, with one of the most lucid thinkers and elegant writers on photography of the 20th century. But I take issue with his premise that the aesthetic appeal of scientific photography is entirely accidental and that they, as he claims, quote, were made independent of artistic tradition and unconcerned with aesthetic standards. So, let's see. To return to the art critic's question, should we consider scientific photographs art just because the show was organized by an art museum? And to this I would answer an emphatic no. But to answer no is not to diminish their importance or their beauty. The vast majority of photographs created during the 19th century would not fall under the conventional definition of art. Many of Carlton Watkins' majestic landscapes of the American West, for example, were made on commission from the landowners and the mine operators whose commercial enterprises they depict. Of the thousands of practitioners of photography who contributed to the development of the medium in the earliest decades, only a handful would ever have identified themselves as artists. But nor is their denial of their status as art a negation of their aesthetic value. They are not art, perhaps, but they are nonetheless pictures. And here it's important to emphasize that scientists have always used pictures because they convey information in a very different way than words. Therefore, no matter whether they have artistic intent, we have to consider what they look like. And more importantly, we have to consider the intersection between what they look like and what they do. And although I'm not going to address them in any detail, I do want to here acknowledge I'm certainly not the first to work in this area, and there's at least three, with tremendous exhibitions who have helped pave the way for this kind of work. And it's a real honor to sort of be in that lineage. And at an early point in my career, I had wanted to do science. I was interested in scientific photography. In the United States, they let you go into university with one major, as I did, in molecular biology, and come out with a degree in art history. It's a $150,000 mistake, but my parents will tell you all about it. You know, the scientific imagery to me was always so interesting. You know, but when I come to do a show like this in 2008, you know, to go head-to-head with John Tarkovsky on this, it's really not fair, because I had decades of scholarship to build on. You know, when John is doing this show in the 1960s, it wasn't even a given that photography belonged in the art museum, whereas by 2008, no one was going to argue with that. Moreover, because of the rise of the photography market in the 1970s and this sort of pouring out of unknown material, the 19th century was already, you know, a subject worthy of study of its own. Not just this sort of bumbling experimental precursor to the apotheosis of photographic modernity, it really became this topic of its own. And that was something that I was particularly interested in. So some of my goals for Brought to Light were really to recover and attend to the historical specificity of the moment. Not to make scientific photography all of a piece from 1840 to the present, but to rather look at this formative moment when modern science and photography were sort of invented at the same time. And as Kelly and others have argued, in this period, scientific photography was not always just an illustration of the science, sometimes it was the science itself. Equally important to me was to think about what visibility and invisibility meant at this particular moment in time when photography is born in 1839, and so is the term scientist. They come at the same time. So modern science is sort of emerging at this same moment. And this was an era when visibility and knowability were inextricably equated. So what does it mean when all of a sudden the world is starting to become this whole new place where suddenly we know disease is caused by germs and not by things in the bad air, when the spectrum of light turns out to have two ends that exceed our visual capacities with the infrared and the ultraviolet, it becomes a whole new world. And so I thought it was really important to think about what photography, which makes things visible, and this sort of intersection between observability, visibility, and knowability in the 19th century. It was important to me, where it was not important to Tarkovsky, to represent the objects in their original form as best I could. John used blow-ups, modern prints. At that time, scientific photographs weren't thought, it was just the image that counted, not the actual object. And I spent years scouring archives in the United States, but mostly in Europe, from Vienna to Bradford to Paris, and really searching out these objects, because really in their objecthood, a history of science can be read. So I just talked a little bit about some of the work in the show and how it fits into this idea. Microscopy, here you see two of my favorites. These are all these works, except for one, are from our collection. Was a new field of science in the 19th century, but it was not exclusively the province of the scientist. In the 19th century, good quality microscopes could be found relatively inexpensively and were a regular feature in upper class homes. So pictures made through microscopes entered into an already established pictorial vocabulary, going all the way back to the invention of the microscope, 17th century Hooke's micrographia. But you really, you start to see actually that most of these 19th century scientific pictures had no scientific value whatsoever. In fact, they entered into a vocabulary that was already part of popular microscopy. They included spider jaws, bee stingers, fly feet, fleas' tongues, all designed to sort of they were really provoked a kind of visceral experience, and were largely designed to show the sort of beauty of the invisible world. Many of the photographs were made for display, as Kelly talked about. Curator was a manufacturer of instruments, scientific instruments. And he regularly exhibited those at industrial fairs. Photographs like this would have been designed to accompany those to demonstrate the sort of potential of his instruments. And I was very happy to see this particular object upstairs because we're not supposed to have favorites, but I do like this one quite a lot. That and Bradford's photomicrograph of a flea, which somebody put on a mug for me actually after the show. So this is a way of making the invisible force of magnetism visible by using iron filings to demonstrate the magnetic fields. And this was used to illustrate a scientific article. Scientific photographers understood that there were multiple audiences for their work. So here you see on one side Max Wolf's photograph, a conventional photograph of the Milky Way, and on the other you see a page from Wolf and Police's star chart. The negative picture, the black stars, is the kind of photograph that astronomers use. It helps them to distinguish between celestial bodies and artifacts on the photographic plate. And in fact, these photographic plates continue to be analyzed. Now they're done by computers, although there used to be women who sat in the laboratories and analyzed those plates. But the one of the photograph of the Milky Way, that glorious body, is of no scientific use whatsoever. Wolf was so convinced of the importance of astronomy to the general public that he published these beautiful photographs of things like the Milky Way. And in fact, he was so convinced of astronomy's importance to the public that he proposed and supervised the construction of the first planetarium in Munich in 1925. I defy anybody to tell me the scientific value behind this photograph, which is a pure demonstration of the powers of the focus tube that Mr. Chabot has invented. It was right after the X-ray was discovered, and everyone and their mother was making X-ray photographs, in large part to demonstrate what things looked like when they were X-rayed. X-rays, I mean, probably everyone in this room has had one at some point, but they were not used in medical diagnosis until World War I, almost 20 years after they were discovered. And for the first 20 years, it was mostly an experiment to see what they could do, what things looked like. So here you can see, actually, if you ever wanted to know how a knife blade was attached to its handle, you can see that there are two wires inside the ivory handle that attach the metal blade to the handle. That this plate was probably meant in actual gold, which is pretty astonishing. And the internal workings of a crayfish are also on display. A photograph like this one is more in the cousin of those photomicrographs of spider jaws and wasp stings because it reveals the incredibly hostile nails lurking in the sole of a unsuspecting boot, the poor person's foot, within the next step, which is puncture of the foot. I mean, they were really sort of revealing the sort of miraculousness of the invisible world. But as I said, the audiences for this were wide and varied, and just as Muybridge's photographs of horses changed the way horses have been painted for centuries, this kind of work really transformed the visual culture of the century. Here you can see the clear impact of scientific illustration on something as iconic as Van Gogh's Starry Night. Scientific photographs are regularly reproduced in magazines like Nature and in Camille Flammarion's Popular History of Astronomy, which Van Gogh is known to have read. And so you can see just within the painting yourself how important this kind of visual imagery was on the culture of the day. I'm going to stop there. I was going to conclude a little bit by talking about the influence of this kind of work on contemporary art, but I think we'll get to that this afternoon. So I will stop there, and I think we'll take some questions. What do we do next? At the end. Never mind, we have one more.